Hi, this is John Adkison again, doing another interview with Laura here to add to the content for the Circumcision Harms documentary. I'm wearing a new shirt today, a new hoodie from with your whole baby's name on it today. I pretty much always have a different shirt on every time I do an interview. I only have, I think, 5 or 6 different ones. So, Laura, please introduce yourself and tell us how you got here.
Hi. Well, I guess probably similar to a lot of moms. I never thought much about circumcision until I found out I was having a boy. And I had seen a little bit about there being an argument, whether you should or shouldn't, in some discussion forums. And of course, it didn't apply to me then, so I didn't really, again, think much about it. And then I realized, well, I'm going to have to make this decision. And it took me less than 5 minutes to realize I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And addressed it with my husband. And he wanted to do it because he is. So it wasn't something he had ever really thought about either. And I just kept showing him the information, and it was an argument for months. And eventually he backed down because I basically said, it's not happening. So it doesn't matter, what you think, but, you need to educate yourself on it and, get with it, basically. So he backed down and he just said, well, if there's ever an issue, you can deal with it. I said, okay, fine. I don't think there will be. And then after a few months, he actually turned to me and he said, I want to thank you for standing your ground because I see now it's unnecessary. I kind of wish that choice was left to me. And he's been the one to tell friends of ours now, not to do it, why it's bad. And I just kept getting more and more involved and been to lots of protests and obviously try to be active online in mom groups and, just telling the truth. And
so protests with like bloodstained men or cockfight?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. I've been fortunate to meet Brother Kay and many others. And it's a great group of people and, proud to be out there with them when I can.
Cool. Great. Any chances you've done any volunteering with your whole baby, like at a table or anything like that?
I did one time in Florida, in Orlando. There was like a parenting fair, and there was a booth set up, so I went and did that.
Sweet. Very nice. Yeah, as guys, when we first start finding out about this, it's kind of a little bit of resistance, right? I feel
I'm
bad.
sure, yeah.
I feel bad for waking up guys, but it's got to be done. Otherwise, this ritual genital cutting is going to continue in this world. So, all right. Well, I'm going to jump into.
Yeah, it's a touchy subject there, but.
Yeah. I'm going to jump into the list of items that I normally cover. Make sure I try to cover every aspect of the harms of ritual genital cutting in the world. And the main topics are physical. Look at the physical attributes of the harm, the how that affects the relationships with partners sexually. Not other relationships, but the sexual relationship with partners. The psychological effects, and again, not just the psychological effects on the individuals that have had their genitals cut, but the psychological effects of everyone involved in whatever shape or form. Then relationships in general, how that affects relationships, and you already touched a little bit on how that. There was a little bit of a relationship on the co-parenting side of things with your husband. And then I touched a little bit on FGM and the relationship between male genital mutilation, male circumcision, and female circumcision or female genital mutilation or katna or whatever they call it. And then the last is about social productivity and how it affects productivity in the world. So first is the physical again. Got my mock penis here made out of yarn. And so the acropostion is a word that's often used to discuss how there's the part that hangs past the glands. And I consider that honestly the foreskin too, because the word fore, F-O-R-E, is supposed to be before, the skin that's before the penis. Not the skin that is on the penis or on the glans penis, but the skin that's before. And John Geisker from Doctors Opposing Circumcision did a presentation in Bellevue when I set up a booth and everything. I asked him to do a presentation there, and he had an image of a Greek statue of a man that's intact, and you could see the part hanging off the end of his penis. That is the acropostion. So for the most part, most cases, especially in the U.S., the entire prepuce is removed, everything covering the glands. So penises end up looking a lot more like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we know from scientific studies, both from the Sorrells study and the Basio study, that it is sensitive skin. And again, if there's anything, I'm going to pause just a little bit in between each of these. If there's anything that you want to say about anything that I cover on this, please chime in.
Okay.
And even the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, said it was almost like a one-line policy statement that the foreskin of the prepuce is there to protect the glands. And that's still true, even though they don't have it on their newer policies. It's still true. It's there to protect the glands. And it's G-L-A-N-S, not G-L-A-N-D-S. It's glands, G-L-A-N-S. That's the part right here, the fireman's hat. And it's not just a flap of skin. It's not a flap of extra skin. It is there for a purpose. It's actually a fold of skin. That people use the term turtleneck. Well, imagine cutting off the skin off of a turtle's neck. What's going to happen to that poor turtle? People joke about it, but it's serious. The penis extends and retracts significantly, so it's supposed to have that skin there. And I get over.
That's one thing that bothers me is when people refer to it as extra. Yeah.
It's not. So because
all
it's
meant to be there.
What's that?
It's all meant to be there.
Exactly. Yeah. So since it is a double fold of skin, it unrolls just like on a turtle's neck, and that unrolling, this depends on the guy. There's some guys have more and some guys that have less. But even when for some men, even when they're erect, they still have some coverage, right? So when they have sex, things move with less friction and without dragging fluids out of the vagina, right? So as you just saw, I had my fingers there. It didn't slide like this. It moved. The penis moved inside of its own sheath. And and when you've got that coverage, things stay moist and lubricated inside. So the male, brings lubrication to the act of sex. It's not all completely dependent on the woman.
Which, in the U.S. especially, everything gets blamed on the woman. You know, she's too dry. That's why there's a problem.
Yeah, get that WAP on, woman. Okay, I'm hearing you just fine now too. So I think the audio only seems to be working. So
all right.
I don't know if you could repeat what you just said. We were talking about the moisture lube effects, and how the woman is often blamed for not being wet enough or whatever. It's kind of like blaming a guy for having erectile dysfunction. I mean, come on.
Yep. Yeah, that's just, I don't know how much was heard, but that's always been, the topic. If the woman's dry, then that means she's not into it, and it's always her problem. No one ever considers that it could be because the man is circumcised. And of course, a man who hasn't, heard about that before just gets offended, and that starts a whole new argument. But that's something, that I've had to deal with before. And I know many other women, they wonder, well, what's wrong? Even though I want to have sex right now, why does it feel like that? And again, all comes back to circumcision. And it's not to blame the man, because obviously it's not his fault if he didn't choose that. But it does need to be discussed so that it can stop and not be a problem in the future. I mean, everyone, I think, deserves to feel what it should feel like when both partners have their intact genitals. So
yeah, and shaming each other for not performing, it definitely isn't going to improve things, right? I mean,
oh yeah.
our brains are our biggest sexual organ, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, so that was the moisture lube thing. The next piece that gets harmed one way or another is the frenulum. It varies depending on the kind of cut that occurs. You have the Bell methods like the Plastibell and the Gomco Clamp that cut lower and closer to the frenulum, whereas the Mogen Clamp or the barzel cut and leave a lot more frenulum and intermucosal layer behind. You might think of this as TMI, but I think that I was cut probably with a Mogen Clamp. So I have pretty much all my intermucosal layer and my frenular area. Now, of course, my frenulum was snipped, kind of like dealing with a tongue tie on a child. In fact, my oldest son had a tongue tie, and his frenulum underneath his tongue held his tongue back so much that when he tried to stick his tongue out, it looked like a fork.
Right.
But so as a quick little snip to relieve that frenulum. And in fact, some men have frenulum breve, which holds their foreskin forward more, and it makes it more difficult for the preputial to unroll down the penis properly. But that frenular area is extremely sensitive. In fact,
right.
The guy from Canada, Foreskin Awareness Project, I'm blanking on his name, but he shows up on the American Circumcision documentary and talks about how just operating on the frenular area can get him to completion. Now, what's interesting is that I connect that to what women often say about how just stimulation of their clitoral area can get them satisfied too. They don't have to necessarily have penetration, or they might need that, even with penetration. And and when you look at how, if you look at medical diagrams and stuff like that, and you see how the male and female genitalia are really the same. It's just a matter of shape, or well, not shape, but size. Things are that's like we both have the corpus cavernosum, for instance, and the clitoral glands is just a small version of the penis glands, and that frenular area is just below the glands on both male and female. So that's the area that is very erogenous for the female. So you don't want to cut that off of a female, don't want to cut it off of male. And I've heard of many cases where that was actually carved out. So.
Oh yeah, terrible. And I've heard men say who do have, that area, even if they're circumcised, is still the most sensitive area of their penis. So you can only imagine if they had everything, how much more so that would be. So
exactly, and yeah, for me, that's a very sensitive area too. And I consider myself very lucky. I've talked with a lot of guys that talk about how their frenulum area was, very ablated, or they were cut with a Bell method where they have very little intermucosal left, which means that a larger percentage of their frenular area is gone.
Right.
And then you have the ridged band, and this is the part kind of like your lips. You have the intermucosal part of your mouth, and then you have the skin, your cheeks, and all that outside. So your lips would be the equivalent of the ridged band. And that part at the end of the prepuce, being the ridged band, it stretches and shrinks as the penis becomes erect and then flaccid again. And that stretching action, from what I understand, has its own erogenous feelings of its own. And us guys that are cut, we have no idea what that is. Even if we're just if we're cut or just our acropostion was removed. I actually spoke with one guy where he was you might consider it a botch, but he was only a little bit was cut off, and it was his ridged band. So it's like he has half of his ridged band or something like that. So he's really angry about that. But yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So some of the effects of these parts being missing is one is hairy shaft. It's often from scrotal webbing. Scrotal webbing is you can look it up and you'll find medical documents on scrotal webbing. And since the scrotum is hairy, then you've got your hairy scrotum drawing up onto the shaft of your penis. So you end up with what appears to be a hairy shaft. Now, some men.
Right, and people don't realize that that's a complication.
Yeah. Yeah, and happens far too often. So yeah, some guys probably grow some hair in those areas on the shaft anyways, on top of it, and not just on the scrotum. But as you get older, like
just not that many. Again, if you compare it to the female genitals, there's not hair where, right around the clitoris and the clitoral hood and the inner labia and again, compared to a man, there's just not hair in those areas. So you wouldn't think it'd be so common, but a lot of people, I guess, think that that's fairly normal in an area where most men are circumcised.
Exactly. You get used to something, you see nothing but one way, and then you start thinking that that's normal, and it's not. And then there's the testes. Because of the scrotal webbing, because the scrotum is being drawn up during an erection, the testes can be affected because the scrotum gets tight. I've seen cases where men's scrotum would cause their testes to spread out and come up to the sides of the penis instead of hanging down below. And for me, when I was younger, teens and 20s and all, before my scrotum stretched out on its own, kind of like women's breasts stretch out from gravity. It used to be that my scrotum would pull up my testes so much that one of my testes would go inside of my body, and when that would happen, it would pop inside my body. It'd be very uncomfortable, and I had to stop and relax things and push that back out before I could continue.
Oh, that would be annoying.
Yeah, and not just annoying for the man, but I'm sure for the sexual partner as well. And then you have the pelvic floor. So this is the part along the top side of the penis that attaches to, the bottom of the stomach. If the cut is too tight, then that skin is tight, and when the erection occurs, it causes the penis to go upward. It bends upward towards the stomach instead of sticking straight out. And you can look at diagrams on the internet that shows the sexual organs, and you can see how the corpus cavernosum goes all the way from the anus straight out, and the penis, when it becomes erect, is supposed to go straight. This would be like a straight line, but with that tight skin on the top of the penis, it ends up curving upward, and that can create problems when having sex, because sexual partners will want to do different positions or whatever that will try to cause the penis to go straight again. So you end up with kind of a double curve. And you kind of think of balloons that they tie up to make animals and stuff like that. You take a balloon and you bend it one way, and then you bend it the other way, and you see that it kinks. Your corpus cavernosum is not designed to kink. It's supposed to get very stiff. Myelostenosis. This is a common case. In fact, I think Brian Earp shared something on Twitter a few days ago about how common myelostenosis is for boys that have been put through infant circumcision. And the whole idea is that it causes the meatus, the end of the urinary tract, to close up a little bit, because it doesn't have the prepuce there to protect. And for me, I had an additional issue where I had a tiny little skin bridge across my meatus that caused my urine to spread when I was trying to urinate. So, and my grandmother got a little irritated at that, and because I was making a mess in the restroom, and took me to the doctor, and sure enough, that's what the doctor found, is that I had a little skin bridge, and he took a little knife and sliced it off. Because it's basically scar tissue, there's no nerves in it, so it didn't really hurt me when he did it, but I have very vivid memories of that.
Yeah, I'm sure that's unfortunate. And I think about, again, being in mom groups on Facebook, how many times I've seen a woman ask if anyone else's son has all these issues. They have to have multiple surgeries, and they're in pain, and is this normal? Why is it like this? And I just, it just breaks my heart. And, of course I have to comment and say something, and I try to be nice, and usually get jumped on or blocked or kicked out of the group. But I feel like they need to have it planted in their mind that this is why your son is having these issues, and hopefully to think about it if they have another son. So
yeah, it's weird. It doesn't matter how gentle you are about this. Women or people see this as shaming them, and it's like, well, I wasn't shaming you. I was just giving you the facts. Your facts don't care about your feelings. It is what it is. And you might be a regret parent about having done this, but yeah, just because I'm sharing this information with you doesn't mean that I'm shaming you.
Right. The truth just is what it is. So, yeah. But you're right. It doesn't matter how you give it to them. They're going to get offended at first, which is understandable. But at some point, they have to accept it.
Yeah. Maybe we should create a mom's group or a parents group that says, I don't know, anti-circumcision mom's group. I don't know. Okay, so then the next thing that kind of goes along with it, with myelostenosis, like I was saying, I had a bit of a skin bridge across my meatus. What often occurs too is skin bridges between the intermucosal part of what's left over of the prepuce or foreskin and the glands, because babies are born with the glands and the inner mucosa attached, much like a fingernail. And the body tries to recover with scar tissue. And that can develop between the inner mucosa and the glands. And then you have erectile dysfunction. And erectile dysfunction, I'm sure, just like if women have troubles getting moist, lubricated, it has two potential causes. You have the physical issues, and then you have what's going on psychologically, right? So for men that have been cut, they can be affected because they're thinking, well, I wonder how it would feel if I had everything, or this is frustrating that I don't have everything, or whatever. It's kind of like a buzzkill, right, to think about that. So that probably contributes to the erectile dysfunction.
Absolutely. It's hard for me to comment, I'm not a man, I'm not in that position, but, I can just imagine if I was a circumcised man, finding out the truth, I think that would just be the most devastating thing ever.
Yeah. And then the last physical effect is genital botches. Now, SPU did a study and found like 11-point-something% of infant circumcisions are botched. That have to be fixed one way or another. Botches could be like amputated glands or lines on the glands because the clamp was put on wrong, or like with a Plastibell, they put on a string to cut off the blood flow to the preputial, so it falls off, it dies and falls off. If that string isn't put on just right, that can cause harm. And sometimes they're not cut evenly, so you end up with skin shorter on one side than the other, and that can cause like curvatures in the penis.
I would think it was much higher than that percent. And another eye-opening thing to me was viewing the Circumcision Gallery of Harm website, seeing the pictures. And, it varied from obviously very visually damaged penis to all the way to what a lot of people would still consider a normal looking penis, because they again don't realize that that's not how a normal penis actually looks.
Yeah.
So I think everyone should look through that website and see the pictures. I think that's the visual of that, and then realizing that that's not just a penis, it's attached to a person who has had to live their entire life with that, and they might have thought that was normal, but again, they've had to think, what's wrong with me, or why is it like this? And that's a hard discussion to have, and a lot of people don't think about that. So
yeah, you're referring to circumcisionharm.org. And for those of you that don't know how to spell circumcision, it's CIRCUMCISION. I often see people spell it differently. like circumcised, CIRCUMSIZE. No, that's not right.
I have seen so many different stuff.
What's that?
I've seen a lot of different spellings, and it's always the people who seem to be for circumcision. They usually don't know how to spell it. So if that doesn't say something, then well.
Yeah. Sometimes when I'm looking for posts and stuff, so I can try to educate people, I'll misspell it on purpose, and I will actually find posts out there where people have spelled it, different ways. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the list of physical harms, and because of those physical harms, there's effects sexually with partners. And I've got this broken up into 3 pieces. So you have heterosexual, like vaginal, penis, vaginal sex. You have anal sex, which some heterosexual people will perform, as well as homosexuals. And then one thing that is specific to homosexuals, which is called docking. So for me, some of my partners would tear if things weren't lubricated well enough, and we get too excited and we jump into things a little bit too fast. And that was, if I had the lubrication, the built-in lubrication on my penis, that far less likely to have happened. Now with anal,
I can't.
What's that?
Well, I have never had sex with an intact man. So from that point of view, while I can understand exactly how that works and I can imagine how that feels, I don't know. My husband has the most foreskin of any partner I've had. And I think that that's what makes it more enjoyable. I can easily see how even more, loose skin would make it even better and, less likely to have tearing and discomfort. So.
Yeah. And one thing I also often hear is how because you don't have that rolling mechanism, all that to kind of like seal off the motion and keep the lubrication in. The lubrication is drawn out, it dries out in the air, and then over a short period of time, the whole, the inside of the vagina becomes drier and drier.
Right.
And then you have anal, which doesn't have any lubrication, and pretty much have to use something like KY jelly or whatever. Whereas with an intact penis, you have both the rolling mechanism and the moisture, the lubrication to enable the anal act. And I was speaking with one person recently that's gay, and he said, "Yeah, I never had to use lubrication." And I often hear from men in like Europe or wherever where it's not common, and they have their old penis. Like, why do men in the U.S. They joke or whatever on these movies and stuff like that about having to use lotion or whatever to masturbate? Don't need that.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the homosexual docking, at least one of the two, the partnership has to have their prepuce in order for homosexual docking to work. Otherwise, it's like, taking swords and just crossing swords instead of having the movement of the prepuce. And if you're up to it, there's porn out there that shows men doing this sort of thing. So that leads us to the psychological effects. First, the trauma from the cut itself. There's been some studies that have even had to be stopped because when they were doing the study, they were like watching things via an MRI or whatever as the child is getting their genitals cut, and they discovered that yes, it's absolutely torture. And you can do things to numb that out. They put nerve blockers into the base of the penis. Or use stuff like what gets used on you at a dentist's office, for example. But even the shots themselves can be painful, right? And
right.
And then you have pain even after that wears off later on because you have this open wound sitting in a diaper, rubbing up against a diaper or whatever. And
exactly,
and
just how painful the whole process must be. I mean, because they can't fully numb it, so
Yeah.
And then they don't wait for it to be numbed as much as it could be either.
Yeah.
But
The baby isn't going to be able to tell you whether it's numbed or not, like you can at a dentist's office.
exactly. And then the whole, oh, they're just crying because they're cold. But
yeah,
I mean, really, that's just, I mean, they're lying to themselves.
yeah, and that trauma often leads to difficulties with breastfeeding and mother-child bonding.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then the mom wonders, well, I couldn't breastfeed, my baby wouldn't latch on, or, they don't think about what they just put their child through.
Yeah, it's hard to
And then,
face that.
oh yeah, they're just complete denial about it.
All right, and then there's the trauma from the discoveries of the loss or harm. When the baby grows up, they might block out what happened as an infant or whatever. And maybe they'll have nightmares like I did and others that I've spoken with. But as we get older and we start learning about this procedure and we start comparing penises with our friends or online or on porn or whatever, and we see that there's something different, that could be traumatic. For me, I feel like I went through trauma. I went through the stages of grief multiple times because I kept learning more and more and more about what I'm missing out on. I don't remember exactly which order I learned, but all those things that we covered in the physical attributes, I learned piece by piece. I didn't learn them all at one time. And I've even tried to share those physical harms with a guy who was Muslim. And I first told him about how, the intact penis has moisture, lubrication. And he's like, what, really? And the more that he thought about it, the more angry he got. And then I tried to start talking to him about other aspects of that, like the rolling mechanism, whatever. And he was shut off. His brain just like, I can't handle it anymore. That's just, that alone is just so overwhelming. It makes me angry that I'm not even open to hearing anything more right now.
Right, yeah, I'm sure. Just sort of shut off after that initial shock and then slowly learn more and more. Just one blow after another.
Yeah, and then you have thousands and thousands of men that are restoring, and you can look at some other interviews. These men get angry when every time they have to put their weights on or whatever. They're constantly reminding themselves of what happened to them, and that
shouldn't have to go through that.
Yeah, and it wasn't done for a good reason. It would be one thing if if you were in a war or an accident or whatever and something happened to you. It's like, well, that's forgivable. That's that's a little bit easier to accept. But when your own parent, or a doctor or someone that you're supposed to be able to trust did it to you, it's a lot more frustrating.
And I think a lot of guys think it was done for a reason. If they were told they had to have it done later on because they had an infection or, something like that, I think it's important for people to know that there are very few legitimate reasons that it needs to be done. None of the reasons which it's done now are any of those legitimate reasons, to prevent infection, because they had an infection, because there was a small tear, because the foreskin wouldn't pull back. All of these things are not reasons to have circumcision done. So I think a lot of guys think, oh, well, I did need to have it done, so they don't think much about it. Again, they should look into that more because none of those are good reasons.
Yeah, like the phimosis reasons. I think that gets misdiagnosed way too often, because doctors aren't taught and you can even look at a lot of textbooks, they're not taught about how the anterior mucosa, the prepuce, is actually attached to the glands, and they think that that's phimosis because you're supposed to be able to see the glands, you're supposed to be able to retract that to clean underneath it or whatever, and that's what often leads to preputial amputations that didn't need to occur.
And I, we call that the phony phimosis diagnosis. There's no validity there. It's just all part of the scam. And it blows my mind that doctors today still don't know about the penis and the truth about circumcision. I just have to believe that ones who suggest it are either just unethical and greedy, or have no business practicing medicine. There's no excuse at this point to be so unaware of these things.
Yeah, I actually looked at a urology book, a urology textbook recently that was edited in 2020, and had eight editors, MDs and stuff like that edited it. And I found all sorts of missing information or very biased information that would lead people toward unnecessary circumcisions. So I ended up writing a letter, a very thick letter, and I sent it to all 8 of them. I think it was 7 out of 8 actually responded with a receipt saying, yes, we got it.
Wow.
So.
Okay.
So that tells you right there, it's not necessarily just greedy doctors, it's doctors that were taught wrong. So we kind of have to attack the textbooks as much as we can. So as I'm sure you know, as most all intactivists know, this has also led to suicide. We've heard of cases like Jonathan Conte, which is probably the most popular one because he was such an advocate for genital autonomy, and he was featured in the American Circumcision documentary. We hear also about like David Reamer and Alex Hardy and some others. And I did an interview just a week or so ago with one guy whose buddy, his friend, committed suicide, and that's what led this guy into intactivism more. And I also did an interview earlier this week with a woman whose husband committed suicide. She did not, she doesn't know how much circumcision played into his suicide, but it was definitely a factor. And then we have our children.
Very important.
What's that?
I just said it's so unfortunate, and people don't want to think about it or even address it, that it could cause such mental stress to make someone want to kill themselves.
Yeah. And then we have the effects on children. Of course, there's children that might be affected because they got cut. And like I was interviewing one guy who said he started figuring it out at age 15. And that obviously created a little bit of stress for him, seeing that he was cut without a good reason. And he went on later on to better understand it as he got older. Unfortunately, we men usually don't understand the full effects of this until we get much older. But typically, we start really realizing the effects when we start having sexual activity, right? But there's also the children that weren't victims. For instance, my own children, my own sons, are intact, and thankfully so. Thankfully, because of an intactivist, someone that gave us information, they ended up staying intact. It was like on the 11th hour, so I kind of feel bad that I didn't think to even take some time to research myself, but that's the way it is. But they see me, and they even join me sometimes on protests. They see the excuses people use for continuing the practice of cutting genitals on children, and they're to me, they look, they look stunned and shocked, and I feel bad that they have to grow up in this world that is still performing what I consider barbaric practices in the world.
And I think in childhood is the time to reach people, and a lot of people feel it's inappropriate to bring this subject to light with children, but I think that they need to know about it, and especially if people think it's okay to do to children and infants, why can't they know about it? My children know about it. My son, who's also intact, he's come to protest with me. I have no doubt in my mind that my children would leave, any of their children intact. It was a no-brainer that that's not something that should ever be done to a child, let alone a little baby. So I think it's important for children to see the message and know about it, even though it's a horrible, terrible thing, but that's how it's going to stop.
Yeah, exactly. The next generation has an opportunity to help put an end to it. And I struggle with it because on one side, I hate that they have to deal with it, but on the other side, having them go out and do protests with us and speak up teaches them that they have a voice.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's important.
I think of gosh, I'm going blank on her name again. The gal that she went to the UN. She's like 12 years old or whatever, and went to the UN and bitched out the UN.
Oh, Greta.
Yes,
her name is Greta, I think.
Yeah. So I think of her when I think of like my own son's out protesting against these genital cutting rituals.
Yeah, I think there's just not an age limit for human rights, and I guess whatever that may be. So
Yeah, I don't know if you read,
or what.
I don't know if you read her story, but it sounded like her father noticed that when she first started learning about what's going on the planet and stuff like that, how Greta got very depressed and withdrew for a while, up to the point where she decided to stand on the side of the road with a sign. I don't know what the sign said, but it was something about protecting the planet, and that's where she came alive.
Yeah, I did not know that.
And look at where it led. So the next thing is the medical professionals. I don't imagine you're a medical professional in any way, are you?
No, I'm not.
So the thinking here is that there's quite a few nurses and doctors in our movement, and a lot of them have talked about their own psychological impact, how they feel when like working in an environment that does this to children. Some medical professionals have like gotten out of hospitals or whatever, go work in clinics where they don't do it.
Yeah, I think that would be very difficult.
And then the psychological effects of the parent, particularly if the parent becomes a regret parent. But to me, I've seen parents, defend this, and they probably will until they're on their deathbed. And they're traumatized, or they're struggling with their own cognitive dissonance or whatever. Psychologically, they're impacted by this practice. And I just imagine a world where genital cutting rituals wasn't occurring and parents weren't involved in choosing, unless there was a medical need, choosing to cut off part of their child's genitals. That would be one last thing to psychologically impact parents. I myself, as much as my children did not get cut because I would have let it happen. The thought of it just makes me sick.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have ever allowed it. It was almost like it just automatically seemed wrong to me. So as soon as I learned, just a little bit about it, that was enough for me to seal the deal. But I can see, again, my husband was all for it. As a circumcised man and father, you probably think that that's just what should be done, and you wouldn't think much about it till maybe after the fact. But
Yeah.
I also got a lot of my information from an intactivist. You probably know who she is. I don't know if I should say her name or not. She probably wouldn't mind, but and I'm still friends with her today now. So
That's great.
people do, yeah, it does stop circumcision from happening, obviously. So
yeah. As much as we intactivists often get burnt out, I've seen it time and time and time again. That's part of what led to all these interviews I've been doing recently. Is I made a post on Facebook saying, "Hey, I'm interested in talking to burnt out intactivists for this docuseries,"
right.
and I got a huge response. I was really shocked. I'm coming up on nearly 2,000 friends on Facebook, but that post went outside of my own friends too. But still, there's a lot of
Yeah.
intactivists that get burnt out.
Yeah, it definitely takes a toll on you. It's you wouldn't think, but you use a lot of energy, and then just having to repeat the message and just seeing the same, you're just met with the same ignorance and anger and closed-mindedness, year after year, and you think, gosh, how is it still, this many people still don't know? How is it happening still this often? It's disheartening. So I can see easily how people would get burnt out. I've been against circumcision now for about 11 years. I guess my son is 10, and I've been avidly speaking out against it since. So it's hard sometimes. It is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to face the fact that this is happening to thousands of children, tens of thousands of children when you consider global numbers, and trying to get through people's cognitive dissonance on the issue. You would think that as an intactivist, you could just like share the American Circumcision documentary or whatever when you come across people. It's like, hey, go watch this. You might learn something about this practice, and they don't. And they'll come back with you, well, they'll ask you this question or that question. It's like, you know what, if you want to watch the flipping video, you have to answer that question already. I don't have time to sit here and educate you via keyboard or whatever. Go educate yourself a little bit.
For the millionth time.
All right, and then the last psychological thing I have on my list is for men that are intact. Just because they weren't cut themselves doesn't mean that they're not psychologically impacted by genital cutting in our cultures and in our world. I've often heard from intact men saying, well, they grew up feeling ashamed or whatever for being intact, or felt bad because their buddies were, were missing something that they had or whatever.
And I've noticed a good mix of men in the intactivist movement who are intact and who have been cut. You just don't realize that just all types of people get pulled into this and want it to end and come together, for that. I've seen people say, oh, they're just, intact, so they want everyone else to be. They don't think, oh, it's a man who has been cut and he's against it, because they've never known a man who was cut and unhappy with it. They always say, well, all the men I know are glad, and that's one reason why it continues. So I think it's good to have some of everybody in the movement against it, because they can't just say it's one type of person.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, people wonder why men don't speak out more about this, and there's several reasons. I've done a video or a couple videos on my YouTube channel that address the whole male side of things, but sometimes on posts you'll see a lot of women speaking out against the practice and not enough men. And my response is, it's the same way too when it comes to female circumcision. the victims don't want to talk about it because it is like reliving their victimhood. And intact men don't want to talk about it because they're shamed with these terms like elephant trunk or turtleneck or or anteater.
Right. Yeah, and I would prefer there were more men to speak out. I know I've been told to, well, you're a woman, be quiet. What could you possibly know? You don't have a penis.
You use one though.
So, right, but I'm a wife and a mother, with a husband and son, so I do, and I know a lot about this, so I do have a say in this. But I, of course, like for the men to speak up first, and I encourage it. I know it's hard to talk about, and I always say there are a lot of men against it, just because they're not in the parenting groups. You see the women mostly against it, but if you look at the protests, there are, I'd say it's 50-50 men and women. And when you look at how many, there's millions of men restoring. So when you look at that, and of course the bloodstained men group, I mean, there are plenty of men speaking out against it. Just because they're not in your mom group doesn't mean they're not out there. So.
Yeah, I personally attend a NORM meeting, a National Organization of Restoring meeting, on a monthly basis, and there's several men in the group that'll talk to other men that are struggling with the loss and trying to restore and all that. But when it comes to speaking out publicly, they can't fathom that. In fact, guy Jay Jackson, who wrote the book called The Circumcision Scar, he wrote the book because he couldn't handle doing activism on Facebook or any social media, because it would trigger him too much and cause too much stress for him in life. So he wanted to share the story, though, in order to address this issue in the world.
Yeah, I think that's something, again, people don't think about, that men who have been hurt by it aren't going to feel comfortable talking about it. They're going to be, I've seen men shamed and silenced for it, saying they shouldn't be, a big baby about it and just be quiet. And I think, that does have a big impact on why there isn't an even louder voice among men who aren't as familiar with it, who are afraid to speak out. They don't all feel even worse about it. So I totally understand that.
Yeah, so everyone ends up getting shamed and shut down about it. Women get shamed and shut down because they don't have a penis. Intact men get shamed and shut down because they have a dirty member or whatever. And then you have cut men that are like, oh, it's not that bad.
Yeah, exactly. So from all ends, you've got nobody, you have people wanting you to just be quiet about it. And what it really is their guilt. It's their conscience that's causing that. So they need to face it.
A reaction, yeah, for sure. Which kind of leads us into the next section, which is about relationships. The first item I have under relationships is the child-parent trust. So I don't feel like this really affects me too much with my parents, but as things go on down the road, as more and more books are become available, and more information is available on the internet, and more documentaries are available that tell people about this, there's less excuse for allowing this to happen to boys. So or even girls, of course, worldwide. But when the child grows up and starts learning about it, it's just another reason not to trust your own parent.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know about you.
If you're willing to do that.
What's that? You kind of cut out there.
Just that, if a child, even once they grow up, just thinking towards their parents, if you were willing to do that, then how much do you love me? Or, should I feel safe with you? I mean, that is a huge factor.
For sure. And as a parent, I imagine having your children trust you is very important. I know for me, I want my children to feel safe to tell me anything and everything that's going on with them. So the next part about relationships is co-parenting, and you referred to this a couple times through this interview already, that you had to convince your husband to look into this information in order to protect your child.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and both sides of our family, my family and his, were both pro-circumcision. So they just thought, well, why is this even an argument, or why am I making such a big deal about it? Or, and I think at this point, both sides have just come to the conclusion that it should be the boy's choice to decide for himself.
So, oh, awesome.
Yep.
Sounds like yes.
And I think that, they're all pretty open-minded, and we do have some doctors and nurses on both sides. So I think it's good for them to also finally have to realize that it's a harmful and unnecessary thing, because I don't think that there are any other intact males within either of our immediate families. So it was all new to them too.
Huh. Well, that's great to hear that you have medical professionals in your family that are coming around to this. We need as many as we can get. But yeah, this co-parenting aspect often leads to even divorces between people just because of this one topic.
I'm sure. I mean, I would leave a man, before ever agreeing to circumcise a son. And I think my husband got that vibe. I'm not sure if I flat out said that or not, but that's what it would have come down to. So I think more women need to stand up to their husbands, because I see that argument a lot that, well, I don't want to argue about it. My husband's adamant, wants it done, and, that's that. And I just wonder what's wrong with you that, you're this child's mother. You have just as much say in protecting them. You need to stand up for your child because you're all they have. So when they just back down and let it happen just so they don't have to argue with their husband, I just don't understand that mentality.
Yeah, don't let your husband's fragile ego lead to the harm of your child.
Right. Yeah. What's more important,
Yeah.
Protecting the ego or protecting a human from physical harm or even death.
Yeah, exactly. And death is something that occurs. And I keep forgetting to mention that in the physical harms, is that yes, overharmed some babies, and hundreds more of other children, when you consider globally, do die from this, whether it's from bleeding out or getting an infection that ends up killing them, or I've heard of burst lungs, many things.
Right. Heart attacks.
Yeah. Of course, they'll blame it on a defective heart or something like that, instead of writing down on the death certificate that it had anything to do with circumcision. But so we really don't know. We really don't know the numbers for sure, because as even this COVID thing, it's become quite clear that doctors can write down. They can write down various things on the death certificate, and they can avoid any kind of blame by writing down certain things on the death certificate.
Yep. Oh, definitely. Yeah, I don't know if we should get into that because I have my own opinions about that, but we're probably on the same page.
Well, that kind of gets on down. It's a couple of steps down here on the list is the doctor-patient relationship. So we'll revisit it here in just a little bit. Then there's the mother-child bond aspect of this. My wife is a trained doula herself, and it's often brought up that it's important for the mother and child to bond, especially right after birth, that there should be skin-to-skin contact and all that.
Mhm.
And breastfeeding is important too. That's a bonding part of the relationship. And if you have a baby taken away to have part of its genitalia cut off, it's going to come back in a traumatized state or become traumatized after it wakes up from the surgery. And it's going to make the bond very difficult.
I mean, I myself can't imagine letting my child be taken away for that reason, but then when they come back, seeing what is visually disturbing and seeing the child in pain, I think a lot of moms must, mentally check out during that time and don't remember, because how could, the healing process, obviously every diaper change, the child's going to be in pain. You're going to have to see the wound. You have to care for it and do all this extra stuff that you wouldn't normally have to do. That must do something.
Yeah.
Obviously to both of, to the mother too. But to their bond, I just, no experience there, but I can't imagine.
So the next relationship thing is about pedophilia. There's lots of theories. I haven't seen any solid studies on this, but plausible theories about how this contributes to pedophilia. Now, these genital cutting rituals have been going on for thousands and thousands of years, so it's very hard to have something to compare with, other than comparing with other cultures that don't do it. But I've heard of people say that some nurses have testified to the fact that the butcher doctor that's doing the cutting would get an erection. But one of my thinking is that if a male is missing half of their erogenous tissue or more, what's left is the pressure sensation to get them excited or finish off or whatever. And the idea is that that younger women typically have tighter vaginas. Thus the attraction from men to younger women. And we find that's not just in the United States, but when you look at forced marriages of children, of young girls, as far as I can tell, that only occurs in genital cutting cultures.
It seems more often, yeah.
And then we have the doctor-patient relationship, as we were discussing. So this might be where you want to jump down the rabbit hole a bit about how you feel about doctors or whatever. But this is just one of the other things that makes me distrust the medical profession a little bit, because I see statistics being messed with in order to make things look one way or another. And especially when it comes to this topic. And I can't imagine having a doctor. I just couldn't. If I come across a doctor that is to be my PCP or whatever, and I have a discussion with them, and they either support or promote, or worst of all, actually perform the procedures, I can't have that person serve me as my physician. I just can't. Because if they can do that if they can accept that and do that to a child, then what kind of things will they justify when it comes to taking care of me?
Oh yeah, I agree. I don't think I could support any practice where they took part in actual circumcision, even if a nurse is assisting in it. Like I just don't have a good feeling about them either. So
I did have a conversation one time with a urologist. I was calling around to urologist offices and doctor clinics and hospitals, especially when their website said something about circumcision, and just called them and told them, I'm a man that is not thankful for this, that I was cut. And I actually ended up having one urologist from one of the offices call me back later that evening and started having conversations with me about it, and when started going through the same excuses that you and I have heard time and time and time again, right? And I was able to address each and every one of them. And at the near the end of the conversation, this was like an hour too. It was not a short conversation. I was surprised that he hung in there and actually had an honest conversation with me about it. He said, "Yeah, you actually bring up a lot of good points." So hopefully at least have a doctor that's open to discussing it.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's important. And I mean, as far as a urologist would go, I've seen some urologists say how many boys they've seen with issues because of circumcision. So I can't see how they would not be aware of just how big of a problem this is when they obviously have seen so many people with problems just because of it.
Yeah. And then the last relationship thing is about friends and family. I hear all the time of intactivists who, their friends and family will unfriend them on Facebook or whatever, or cut off communications with them because of believing in genital autonomy.
Yeah, I've lost a few friends, although I don't think much about it because I don't think they were really good friends. I guess after all, if they're willing to, block you or not talk to you anymore because of that, because of their refusal to accept the truth, I mean, then it's their loss, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
They have to come around on their own. As for family, that's just unfortunate. It's harder to cut off family, obviously, especially if you have to see them and possibly be around and talk to them. I mean, that's harder. I haven't had to deal with that, but I think I would disown a family member. They would just mean really nothing to me. I'd lose all respect for them, or a friend if I had warned them about the dangers and told them the truth and they still went through with it. I think that it wouldn't be hard to let them go. I'd be sad that they decided to still do it, but it wouldn't be hard for me to just, unless they later on said, you know what, I was wrong and I'm now a regret parent. Because I do have respect for regret parents because I think that's hard to admit. And I think that their stories do stop a lot of new victims from happening. So
definitely. And my thought that got me to finally speak out publicly without fear of losing friends and family and professional relationships even was the idea that the opposite could occur down the road. Like one of my nephews could 15 years into the future or whatever, they could learn about the harm that was done to them when they were a baby, and they might look to me and say, well, you knew about this, you knew that this was wrong, why didn't you speak out? So I'm not going to sit around anymore and have that happen. I mean, that would just break my heart. 15, 16,
right.
17, 18 years
You can
from
at
now.
least say you tried.
Yeah. Yeah. So, to me, the next generation is more important than the grown up adults, grown up
I
adults need to
agree.
get
I
with it.
agree. Yep. And I say that all the time that unfortunately a lot of feelings are going to be hurt along the way, but it's all about saving, the children who are being born now and who will be born in the future. And that's the important part. So,
Yeah. Okay, then the next major section is about FGM. At least that's the term that we hear most often in the United States and probably other parts of the world, because that's the term that makes it onto mainstream media a lot. In fact, if you do a query on Facebook, or not Facebook, on Google for FGM, and then you do another query on circumcision, the numbers are staggeringly different. FGM gets a lot of press, but
oh yeah.
these genital cutting rituals are tied, and I think that the mainstream press fails to acknowledge that, maybe out of fears of offending religious factions or whatever. But you can read like Rosemary Romberg's book, and there's some theories about how genital cutting practices came into being. We only have written history up to the Egyptians writing on the walls, but one of the beliefs is that they started doing it to females to be inclusive, right? And it's kind of funny because a lot of people think that FGM is an inequality thing. It's like, well, wait a second. Female genital cutting only occurs in cultures that male genital cutting is also occurring. So it's not how it works. They're not cutting females to be unequal, or to reduce them to be lower citizens than males.
Right. Yeah, I don't know why somehow the world, or most of the world, has it in their mind that cutting a female is so wrong, and so different compared to doing it to a boy. Because when you look at it, it's the same. And some people, even leading voices against female genital mutilation, will say that male genital mutilation, circumcision, is far more damaging and traumatizing, which makes sense. There's a lot more tissue there. So when people start saying, well, no, female circumcision is completely different, that's way worse. It does all these things, and they list off, removes sexual pleasure, causes pain or embarrassment or whatever it may be. It's the same for males too. So,
well, definitely from an ethical standpoint, it is the same, right? But what a lot of people don't realize, because the mainstream media only talks about the absolute worst form of female genital cutting, which involves infibulation and like removal of all the external genitalia. That sounds absolutely horrible. The husband stitch, as they put it sometimes. That's absolutely horrible, and that's showing people trying to control women's sexual activity. But when you look at the history of male circumcision, it's the same thing. That's what it's always been about, is trying to control the male sexual drive. When in reality, it's not even a physical thing. It's our brains and our what are those things? Hormones are what I believe drives it far more than what we have physically on our body. Just because we don't have as much of a genitalia doesn't mean that we're gonna have less of a sexual drive.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't stop the desire for it.
Yeah. So I keep saying that we kind of need to bring this all down together as one, because it's the same excuses for all of them. When it comes down to control of the individual, that's the main reason why we do pretty much any genital cutting, even when it comes to the intersex side of things. If the child is born with too large of a clitoris or too small of a penis or whatever, we feel the need to change things to fit the binary side of sex.
Which now I guess they have legal protection. So at this point, why don't, just biological born males?
Yeah.
I think you're right that it is a lot to do with protecting religious practices.
Yeah. And how does that match up with the equal protection laws? It's like you can't protect one group without protecting the other. So.
Yeah. Right. Which is why I guess they decided now that female cutting is okay, because they realized they can't take away one, and leave the other.
Yeah. Features can be interesting on the law book side of this. Okay, so the last section of this is about social productivity. Now, from one aspect of this, I just imagine all the moils and doctors, butchers, or whoever that does the genital cutting. If they weren't doing that, what would they be doing instead? Maybe curing cancer? I don't know. Or maybe curing COVID. Right? And then we have advocates like you and I, Laura, that are spending many hours a day trying to convince people that this is harmful and that it shouldn't be going on and all that. And what would we be doing with our time instead? We could be building houses or growing crops or whatever to feed, make sure everyone's fed and housed.
Yeah. I can't imagine. I have no idea how many countless hours I've spent trying to get people to see the truth on this. But so if you think about everyone in the movement, I mean, that's a lot of time and effort.
For sure. Well, Laura, that brings us to the end of my list. Is there anything else you want to share about this topic?
I think you covered pretty much everything. I mean, I guess in my mind is racing with all kinds of stuff. And, at this point, I sort of hold back something because I feel like, I've said that so many times. But then I realized, well, someone who might not know might hear it. But I think you covered a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of proud of my list.
Yes, you're very thorough.
It just dawned on me. I just kept dawning on me. It's like, boy, the effects of this are so widespread. It's just amazing. You're not just affecting the individual that's getting cut. It's everyone.
Right. There's a lot to it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for taking the time. I know you're busy with your little ones. I'm
amazed I've had this much time, but thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Well, have a good day.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.